Have you ever imagined that one day you could be thrown out of the very place you built with all your trust and dreams? A place once created to welcome everyone had now turned into a space of discrimination and contempt toward hard-working, honest people. This is the story of Adrian Cole, the founder of Cole's Brewhouse, a cafe once famous for its warmth and kindness. But during one undercover visit, disguised as a delivery driver, Adrian uncovered a painful truth. His cafe had turned into a playground for greed and deceit. And it was from that very moment of humiliation that Adrian decided to launch a dramatic investigation to expose everything, right in front of the customers, in the very place that once bore his name. What happened during that public confrontation? Who paid the price? And most importantly, could a dream built on kindness be restored? Stay with this story until the end, because what Adrian didn't just change the fate of one cafe. It serves as a powerful reminder that when justice speaks, the truth will always prevail. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the cobblestone street, casting a warm, golden hue over the polished metal sign that read, Cole's Brewhouse. The name of the cafe, the same as the man standing silently at its entrance, seemed to shine brighter than usual. But to him, it felt as cold as a gravestone. Adrian Cole took a deep breath, his hand tightening around the faded strap of the delivery bag slung over his shoulder. Sweat dampened the back of his worn uniform, its creases making him look every bit the part of an ordinary delivery driver, with nothing to suggest he was the successful founder of the place. And that was exactly the point. Today, he wasn't stepping inside as the owner, but as a stranger hoping to be served a simple cup of coffee. The glass door slid open, releasing the rich aroma of freshly roasted coffee and the soft hum of conversation. For a fleeting moment, Adrian remembered the early days of the cafe, when he himself had stood in this very spot, greeting every guest with a smile, handing over each cup of coffee with genuine warmth. But today, all he received was the cold stare of a young woman behind the counter. "We don't serve delivery drivers. Please go somewhere else." Tori's voice was sharp and unyielding, her eyes glancing over him as though he was nothing more than an inconvenience. For a moment, Adrian thought he had misheard, but the indifferent look on Tori's face and the annoyed glances from a few regulars confirmed everything. He gave a slight nod, saying nothing, and stepped back. The glass door closed behind him, leaving the sound of a quiet laugh from someone inside and the sharp clink of a glass being set down too hard, whether by accident or on purpose. He didn't know. Standing on the sidewalk, Adrian lifted his gaze to the shimmering sign above, glowing under the sunset. Cole's Brewhouse, once a dream, a promise, and a belief that this would be a place where anyone, whether a worker, a student, or a weary delivery driver, would be welcomed with a smile. But now, there was no place for him here. A gentle breeze passed by, carrying the warm scent of roasted coffee from inside. But to Adrian, it only made everything taste bitter. He no longer stood there as a proud owner, but as a stranger who had just been thrown out of the very home he had built. In that moment, a deep, indescribable pain rose inside him, not just from the humiliation, but from the betrayal of the values he had once held sacred. And then, in the silence, a single thought emerged. Cold and sharper than ever before. It was time to find out what was really happening inside his own place. Adrian Cole stood still on the cobblestone sidewalk, the golden light of dusk casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across his face, mirroring the turmoil inside him. His eyes locked on the familiar sign, filled with doubt and pain. Those gleaming metal letters had once been the greatest pride of his life, proof of the years of hardship he had endured to build a place called Cole's Brewhouse, a place where everyone who walked in would be treated with respect. But now, that very name felt foreign, cold, suffocating. Memories from the past flooded back so vividly, he almost felt he could reach out and touch them. He remembered himself years ago, wearing a worn-out jacket, riding a delivery bike through the rain. He remembered standing outside upscale cafes, his hands trembling as he held a steaming hot meal, only to be met not with gratitude, but with condescending stares and curt words, as if he were nothing more than a disposable object. Those moments of humiliation had fueled his dream to create Cole's Brewhouse, a place where no one would ever feel small or ashamed when they walked in, a place where even the hardest working laborer would be greeted with a sincere smile. Yet now he, the very man who had made that promise, had been turned away. A soft breeze drifted by, carrying the rich scent of roasted coffee from inside the cafe. In the past, that smell would have filled his heart with warmth and pride, but today it felt like mockery, like a blade twisting deep into his pride. His hand clenched the strap of his delivery bag so tightly his knuckles turned white. A drop of sweat, or maybe a tear, slid down his cheek, burning as it went. Amid the flow of passers-by, Adrian stood frozen, his eyes still fixed on the sign above. But the belief he once held was gone. The only thing left was a single, piercing question echoing in his mind. Has Cole's Brewhouse changed, or have the people inside it changed? And then, like a whisper from his own past, the answer came, sharp and undeniable. It wasn't the cafe that had changed. It was the people running it who had betrayed its original promise. Humiliation rose in his chest, but it was quickly replaced by something else. A cold, unshakable resolve. Adrian knew he could no longer just stand there and watch. It was time to face the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. That night, Adrian sat in his small apartment, the dim yellow light casting weary shadows across his face. But his eyes burned with something unusual, a mix of disappointment and suspicion. He set the worn delivery bag in the corner, letting the smell of sweat and city streets cling to it, then collapsed into the old wooden chair. On the table, his laptop glowed, reflecting his silhouette against the darkened screen. Adrian turned to the one thing he had always trusted: customer reviews. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, and each line of text that appeared felt like a tightening grip on his chest. Delivery drivers are refused service. They say this cafe is only for upscale guests. I wore work overalls and was asked to sit in a separate area. The staff looked annoyed the whole time. We paid like everyone else, but they looked at us as if we were freeloaders. Every review was a blade cutting deep into the image of the warm, welcoming cafe he had once been so proud to show the world. Leaning back in his chair, Adrian buried his head in his hands, but his mind refused to rest. There was more here than discrimination, something deeper rotting away at this place. He remembered the weekly financial reports sent to his email. A nagging instinct pushed him to open the latest file. Numbers filled the screen, and within minutes, Adrian spotted something wrong. Supply costs had skyrocketed absurdly. Norwegian salmon, imported beef, truffles, premium red wine. None of these had ever been part of the Cole's Brewhouse menu. His brows furrowed, his heartbeat quickening. A memory surfaced. Just last week, he had asked Victor Hale, the assistant manager he had trusted more than anyone, about the rising costs. Victor had smiled casually, his voice relaxed to the point of suspicion. Inflation, Adrian. Everyone's feeling it right now. But staring at these figures, Adrian knew this wasn't inflation. Someone was stealing, and it might be the very person he had trusted the most. In the quiet room, the ticking of the clock echoed steadily. But to Adrian, it sounded like a warning. Time to save Cole's Brewhouse was slipping away, second by second, and he could not afford to wait any longer. The atmosphere in the room felt heavier as Adrian stood motionless in front of the old wooden cabinet, the dim yellow light casting tense shadows across his face. His eyes no longer held the warmth of a passionate cafe owner, but had hardened into a sharp, determined gaze. He opened the cabinet, the wooden doors creaking softly as if they too sensed that he was about to do something significant. Inside, in a dusty corner, was the old delivery uniform he had worn through endless days under the scorching sun and pouring rain. The fabric was frayed, the seams on the shoulders had come loose, and the faded cap still bore faint stains from long, grueling shifts. Adrian reached out and touched it, his fingers tracing the rough fabric, bringing back the familiar feeling. The feeling of a man once looked down upon by the world. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, as if breathing in the sweat, dirt, and dreams that had once lived inside that uniform. But this time, he wasn't wearing it to earn a living. He was wearing it to stare directly into the rotting truth festering inside the cafe that bore his name. He stood in front of the mirror, slipping the old shirt over his shoulders, and the sensation came rushing back instantly. The reflection staring back at him wasn't Adrian Cole, the confident founder of Cole's Brewhouse, but an ordinary delivery driver, shoulders bent under years of hardship. But that was exactly what he needed. To expose those who had betrayed the original ideals of his cafe, he had to become invisible, just like the people this system had chosen to ignore. His eyes lingered on his own face in the mirror, and this time, instead of disappointment, his gaze turned cold, sharp like a blade. You want to hide behind numbers? You want to use my name to feed your greed? Fine, I'll see it all. Every single one of you. He muttered to himself, his voice low and hoarse, sounding more like an oath than a statement. Or, outside the window, night had fallen, and the dim street lights cast his shadow long and distorted against the cracked wall. A breeze slipped through the gap in the window, rustling the thin curtain, and in that fleeting moment, Adrian felt as if everything had already been set in motion. Tomorrow, Cole's Brewhouse would have no place left to hide from him. The next morning, Adrian walked quietly down the alley behind the cafe, the same alley he had once insisted remain open for delivery workers, people like he used to be. His worn-out shoes scraped softly against the damp cobblestones, and the faint scent of kitchen smoke mixed with the aroma of hot coffee lingered in the air. The back door was slightly ajar, and no one paid him any attention, just as he had predicted, because to them, a man in a delivery uniform was nothing more than part of the faded background, not worth a second glance. Adrian stepped inside, blending into the busy flow of people, every movement careful, his eyes missing nothing. The sizzle of hot oil, the clatter of metal ladles striking pans filled the air chaotically. But what made him stop was a scent. Rich, unfamiliar. It wasn't the smell of freshly roasted coffee or buttery bread he loved, but butter melting with garlic, white wine, herbs, and a faint trace of truffle, flavors that had never been part of the cafe's menu. His heartbeat quickened, each thump pounding in his chest like an alarm bell. Pressing himself against the wall, Adrian peered through the open kitchen door. And then, the truth hit him square in the chest. In the middle of the kitchen, Chloe, one of the veteran staff members, was laughing, her hands skillfully drizzling a creamy sauce over a plate of truffle risotto. Beside her, Evan sliced into a perfectly cooked steak, its pink center glistening under melting butter. They weren't rushing. They weren't preparing meals for customers, but savoring every moment as if enjoying a private feast. Adrian's eyes followed another staff member, carrying beautifully plated salmon fillets, toward the VIP section, where two men in expensive suits sat comfortably, being served with special attention. Just minutes later, a man in a worker's uniform stepped in and asked for a table, only to be met with a cold shake of the head from the front desk clerk. "We're full." Through the glass panel, Adrian could clearly see several empty tables. His grip on the delivery bag tightened, veins standing out on the back of his hand. His chest rose and fell rapidly, not with fear, but with anger. Cole's Brewhouse, the place he had promised would never make anyone feel small, had now become a place where customers were judged by their clothes and their wallets. He closed his eyes briefly, forcing himself to hold back the fury boiling inside him. This was only the beginning. He needed to dig deeper, to uncover who was truly behind all of this. And Adrian swore to himself, what he saw today would be only the first step toward making them pay. That evening, the cafe had begun to empty of customers, but inside, the staff's laughter still echoed, as if they were enjoying a private world untouched by anyone else. Adrian stood concealed behind a shelf near the storage room, his breathing steady, his eyes locked on the storeroom door. He knew if someone was pulling the strings behind all of this, tonight would be the night they slipped. And he was right. At around 9 o'clock, Victor Hale, the assistant manager, the man Adrian had once trusted completely, appeared, his stride casual, a smug smile lingering on his face. In his hands was a cart stacked with premium ingredients, fresh packed salmon, prime beef cuts, truffles, and expensive bottles of wine. There was nothing secretive about him. Every movement was smooth and confident, as if this had become a well-rehearsed routine. Adrian watched every motion, every subtle gesture. Victor glanced quickly around, saw no one paying attention, and opened the back door of the cafe. The yellow light from the parking lot spilled across his face, highlighting that air of arrogance. Calmly, he began loading the ingredients into the trunk of a black SUV parked outside, stacking each box neatly, like someone who had done this dozens of times before. Adrian held his breath, his hand unconsciously gripping the strap of his delivery bag so tightly that his knuckles turned white. In that moment, every suspicion became undeniable truth. Victor wasn't just an accomplice. He was the mastermind. And worse, he had turned Cole's Brewhouse into nothing more than a machine to feed his own endless greed. Adrian's gaze followed Victor until the trunk closed. That relaxed posture, the way Victor whistled softly as if this was just another ordinary workday, made Adrian's chest tighten with rage. He had trusted Victor, had once considered him a brother who stood by his side during the hardest days. And now, that very man was trampling on the ideals Adrian had built with sweat and tears. In the darkness, Adrian swallowed down his fury, but his eyes turned cold, sharp enough to cut through the night itself. He couldn't rush this. If he wanted to bring the entire corrupt system down, he needed evidence. Evidence that no one could deny. And as Victor drove away with that smug smile, Adrian made his decision. This game was about to end, and he would be the one to write the final chapter. That night, Adrian's small apartment was bathed in the cold blue glow from his laptop screen. He sat motionless at the desk, his eyes locked onto rows of numbers and the notes he had been saving on his phone over the past few days. Every detail, every dishonest act of the staff at his cafe played in his mind like a grim, unending film. But Adrian knew that anger alone wasn't enough. To expose everything, he needed something no one could deny. Evidence. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, pulling up pages of compact surveillance devices, cameras disguised as shirt buttons, miniature voice recorders, motion sensors that could connect directly to his phone. Adrian ordered them all without a moment's hesitation. Every piece was chosen with a precision that felt almost surgical, like a hunter preparing for the ultimate chase. His eyes shifted to the small mirror hanging on the wall. The reflection staring back at him was no longer that of a kind cafe owner who once dreamed of creating a place where everyone was welcome. Now it was Adrian Cole, with sharp, cold eyes, a hardened face, and a resolve forged from steel. "You think you're smart? You think you can keep this hidden from me forever?" Adrian muttered, his deep, rough voice breaking the silence of the room. "Fine. I'll let you tell the truth yourselves, right in front of everyone." He pressed the confirmation button, and the soft ding from his laptop rang out like the tolling of a bell, signaling the beginning of something far greater. Outside the window, the night wind blew hard, making the thin curtains sway gently. Adrian stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the dimly lit street, where sparse yellow lights barely pushed back the darkness. Inside him, something strange rose up. Not fear, but a chilling calm. He knew that tomorrow, when he stepped into the cafe, he would no longer be just an observer. He would be the one pulling the strings, the one controlling the entire game. Adrian returned to the desk, opened his worn notebook, and wrote a single line on a blank page in firm, deliberate strokes. "Tomorrow, it begins." Setting the pen down, he exhaled slowly, his eyes gleaming with a light that was both cold and quietly triumphant. Cole's Brewhouse had betrayed him, but he would restore it to what it was meant to be, with truth, with justice, and by making every traitor bow before the weight of their own actions. That morning, the atmosphere inside Cole's Brewhouse felt different, as if a storm was quietly waiting to break. The glass door swung open, and Adrian stepped in, no longer wearing the worn-out delivery uniform, but instead dressed in a dark, crisply pressed suit. His eyes were cold, calm to the point of making every staff member who caught sight of him freeze instinctively. The familiar chime of the doorbell rang, but this time it wasn't a welcoming sound. It was a warning that something was about to change. Adrian didn't need to say much, didn't need to issue any threats. He walked straight to the center of the cafe, placed his laptop on the large table, and connected it to the wall-mounted screen that usually displayed menus and promotions. One click, and the display changed. The cafe slowly fell silent. Customers began turning their attention toward him, while the staff looked increasingly uneasy, their faces draining of color. On the screen, videos began to play. Chloe appeared first, laughing loudly as she poured truffle over a plate of risotto. Evan came next, slicing into a perfectly cooked steak and tasting it casually. Then came footage of other staff indulging in lavish meals during work hours. Murmurs spread throughout the cafe. Some customers covered their mouths in shock, while others exchanged angry glances. And then the next clip made the entire room fall silent. Victor Hale, his face illuminated under the parking lot lights, loading boxes of expensive ingredients into the trunk of his personal SUV with ease. No one said a word in defense. Adrian stood tall, one hand resting lightly on the table, his gaze sweeping across every staff member now staring down at the floor. His voice was steady, warm yet commanding, carrying a weight that cut through the air. Cole's Brewhouse was built to welcome everyone, to treat all people with respect. But you turned it into a place that judges customers, serves only the wealthy, and looks down on hard-working people. And worse, you stole. He paused, letting his words sink in. A few customers began to speak up, their voices tinged with anger. "We pay for these meals, so you can feast on them." A worker sitting quietly in the corner clenched his fists, his eyes reddening with rage. Adrian turned back to the staff, his voice firm and precise, every word landing like a blade. "Chloe, Evan, Victor, pack your things and leave. From now on, you have no place at Cole's Brewhouse." The cafe fell into a heavy silence. Chloe lowered her head, her face pale. Evan clenched his hands but said nothing, and Victor, once smug and confident, stood frozen for a few seconds. But when he met Adrian's sharp gaze and saw the furious stares of the customers around them, all he could do was grit his teeth and walk out. The glass door shut behind them with a sharp, final click. Adrian took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping across the cafe, and for the first time, his voice softened as he spoke to the still silent customers. "Cole's Brewhouse does not belong to the greedy. It belongs to you, the ordinary people, the workers, the ones who were once turned away. And from today, that will never happen again." The customers began to clap, not loudly but warmly and sincerely, and Adrian, standing amidst those gazes, felt as though he had just laid the first brick in rebuilding the promise he made long ago. After the glass door closed behind those who had just been expelled, the cafe sank into a brief silence, broken only by the hushed whispers of still, shaken customers. Adrian stood in the center of it all, his gaze softening, no longer carrying the cold edge it had held when confronting the betrayers. He adjusted the collar of his vest with a calm gesture, then slowly walked toward the bar, where Noah Ramirez, the thin, aging janitor, stood frozen, gripping a cleaning rag tightly, his worried eyes unsure whether he should stay or quietly slip away. Adrian stopped in front of him, looking directly into those honest, weathered eyes. "Noah," he said, his voice no longer sharp but warm and steady, filled with trust. "You're the only one here who hasn't forgotten why Cole's Brewhouse was built. You haven't just been doing your job. You've been holding on to the last shred of decency left in this place." Noah swallowed hard, his hands trembling around the rag as his hoarse voice broke the silence. I've just been doing my work, Mr. Cole." Adrian shook his head slightly and pulled a set of gleaming keys from his pocket, the master keys to the cafe. Placing them firmly into Noah's hands, Adrian spoke with quiet authority. "Starting today, you're not just doing your work. You are the manager of Cole's Brewhouse. You don't need to know about profit margins or sales figures like those before you. I only need you to remember one thing. Treat everyone the way you would want to be treated. That is the true spirit of this place." Noah stared at the keys in his hands, his eyes brimming with tears. His calloused fingers tightened around them, as if afraid it was only a fleeting dream. His voice shook, thick with emotion. I've never managed anything before. I don't know how to run a cafe this big." For the first time that day, Adrian's genuine smile returned. "You don't need to know everything, Noah. You just need to hold on to what they lost. Kindness." Around them, the customers began to applaud, not loudly, but with heartfelt sincerity. It wasn't for show, it was because they had just witnessed something rare, justice being restored in the very place where it had been lost. Noah lowered his head, his voice still trembling, but now steady with resolve. "I promise, Mr. Cole, I'll keep this place exactly as you intended it to be." Adrian placed a reassuring hand on Noah's shoulder, nodding firmly. "I trust you." In that moment, the atmosphere in the cafe felt renewed, as if the weight of all its past wrongs had been lifted. Cole's Brewhouse, after straying so far, finally had a chance to return to the values it was meant to uphold. A few weeks later, Cole's Brewhouse had taken on a completely new atmosphere, not because of fresh paint on the walls or newly polished furniture, but because of the warm, genuine energy that now filled every corner. Tables that had once been left empty were now full. Delivery drivers sat alongside office workers. Construction workers in protective gear laughed and chatted with students hunched over their laptops. No one was looked at with judgmental eyes, and no one was turned away because of the clothes they wore. Laughter and conversation blended with the rich aroma of freshly roasted coffee, making the cafe feel alive again, as if it were finally breathing freely after being suffocated for so long. Behind the bar, Noah Ramirez stood proudly in a clean new apron, his kind smile ever present on his face. He moved slowly, but with care, greeting every guest with sincere eye contact. Every now and then, he would kneel slightly to ask a tired delivery driver how their day had been, or quietly hand a stressed student a free glass of water. The new employees, carefully chosen not just for their skills but for their attitude, stood by his side, watching and learning from his every small gesture. "We don't just serve coffee," Noah told them, his voice steady yet gentle. "We serve people. Anyone who walks through this door is just as important as anyone else." At his usual corner table, Adrian Cole sat quietly, holding a cup of coffee but not drinking it, his eyes following every detail of what was happening around him. He was no longer the center of attention, and that fact made him happy. Instead, he watched in silence, like a father watching his child recover after a long illness. A young delivery driver smiled brightly as he received a steaming cup of coffee. A group of students burst into laughter at a long table, and a nurse on her lunch break sat peacefully enjoying a piece of cake. Each of these small, simple moments warmed Adrian's heart. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply, his eyes reflecting a sense of relief. For the first time in months, Adrian felt that Cole's Brewhouse had truly returned to what it was meant to be, a place for everyone. Through the cafe's glass windows, sunlight spilled across the old metal sign outside, making the engraved letters glisten as if they too were smiling with him. In that quiet moment, Adrian whispered, not for anyone else to hear, but only for himself, "This dream never died. It was just waiting for me to bring it back." He took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the slight bitterness mix with a hint of sweetness linger on his tongue, just like the journey he had been through. And deep in his heart, he knew. Cole's Brewhouse had been reborn, and this time it would never again betray the ideals he had spent his life building. An expert once said, "The true strength of a brand does not lie in its revenue, but in how it treats the smallest, most ordinary people." And Adrian Cole proved that, through action, through unwavering determination to bring Cole's Brewhouse back to its original values, a place where everyone deserves to be respected. This story is not just about a coffee shop, but a reminder that justice always begins with kindness. If you also believe that respect is the truest form of class, hit like to help spread this message, subscribe so you don't miss more inspiring stories, and leave a comment with the words, "Believe in people," to let us know you agree with this.